The October morning carried that peculiar chill that makes Tennessee mornings feel sharper than they should. At Benjamin Franklin Elementary School in Knoxville, 8-year-old Danny Peterson sat on the concrete steps outside the main entrance, his Star Wars backpack sagging beside him like a deflated balloon. His knees were scraped raw from being shoved into the gravel playground 2 days earlier, and his left eye still carried the faint yellow-green shadow of a bruise that makeup couldn't quite hide. Danny's mother, Rebecca, had tried everything. She'd met with Principal Harris 3 times. She'd called the school board. She'd even considered pulling Danny out entirely. But single mothers working 2 jobs don't have the luxury of homeschooling. The bullying had started small: stolen lunches, name-calling, the usual cruelty that kids inflict when they sense weakness. But it had escalated. 3 boys from the 5th grade, led by a kid named Trevor Dunham, whose father happened to be on the school board, had made Danny's life a living nightmare. Rebecca had parked her battered Honda Civic in the pickup line, watching through the windshield as Danny trudged toward the school entrance. She'd seen that walk before, the shuffle of defeat, shoulders hunched forward like he was bracing against a storm only he could feel. Her heart broke a little more each morning. She'd reported the incidents, provided photos of bruises, even recorded Danny crying in his room at night, begging not to go to school. Nothing changed. Trevor's father had connections. The principal kept insisting it was just kids being kids and that Danny needed to toughen up. What Rebecca didn't know was that her younger brother Marcus had been paying attention. Marcus was a mechanic at Smoky Mountain Custom Cycles, a garage on the outskirts of Knoxville that served as an unofficial clubhouse for the local chapter of the Hells Angels. Marcus himself wasn't a member, but he'd worked on their bikes for years, earned their respect, and considered several of them friends. When Rebecca had broken down crying over the phone 3 nights earlier, telling Marcus she didn't know what else to do, Marcus had made a decision. He'd called Jack Ironside Morrison, the chapter president, a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before a storm. Ironside was 52, built like a concrete wall, with a grey-streaked beard that fell halfway down his chest and arms covered in ink that told the story of 30 years on the road. He'd served 2 tours in Iraq, lost his younger brother to a drunk driver, and dedicated his life to the Brotherhood. But beneath the leather vest and the scars, Ironside had something that surprised most people: a fierce, protective instinct for the vulnerable. When Marcus explained Danny's situation, Ironside had gone quiet on the other end of the line. Then he'd said, "Give me 24 hours." Ironside had made calls to other chapters across Tennessee, Kentucky, and even northern Georgia. The message was simple: a kid needed help, and they were going to make sure he got it. By the next evening, confirmations were rolling in. Brothers were already firing up their bikes, planning routes to Knoxville. Some were riding solo, others in packs. The idea wasn't to intimidate an 8-year-old bully. It was to send a message to the adults who had failed to protect a child. On Wednesday morning, October 15th, the rumble started around 7:30. It began as a distant growl, like approaching thunder rolling across the Smoky Mountains. Inside Benjamin Franklin Elementary, teachers paused mid-sentence. Students looked up from their workbooks. Principal Harris, sitting in his office reviewing budget reports, felt the vibration through his desk before he heard the sound. The rumble grew louder, then louder still. Outside, the first motorcycles appeared at the end of Oakwood Drive, a residential street lined with modest 2-story homes and chain-link fences. They came in formation, 2 by 2, a river of chrome and black leather stretching back as far as anyone could see. The lead rider was Ironside himself, his Road King gleaming in the morning sun, the Hells Angels insignia prominent on his vest. Behind him rode Tank, a man who looked like he'd been carved from a mountain, and Spider, a wiry Vietnam vet with eyes that had seen too much but still sparkled with mischief. They kept coming. Dozens became hundreds. The sound was deafening, a mechanical roar that shook windows and set off car alarms down the block. Parents dropping off their kids stood frozen on the sidewalk, mouths open. Teachers rushed to the windows. The school resource officer, a young deputy named Collins, who'd been on the job less than a year, stepped outside and immediately reached for his radio, then thought better of it. This wasn't a threat. This was a statement. Danny had been sitting in Mrs. Patterson's third-grade classroom when the rumble started. He'd looked up from his math worksheet, confused. The other kids were rushing to the windows, pointing and shouting. Danny followed, his heart pounding, unsure what he was about to see. When his eyes found the street below, he froze. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, more than he could count. They were pulling into the school parking lot, lining up along the curbs, filling every available space. Men and women in leather vests, dismounted, standing beside their bikes with arms crossed, creating a wall of solidarity that stretched around the entire school perimeter. Ironside was the first to approach the front entrance. He removed his sunglasses, folded them carefully, and tucked them into his vest pocket. Principal Harris had emerged from the building, his face pale, his tie slightly askew, as if he'd yanked at it nervously. Behind him stood Vice Principal Martinez and the school counselor, Mrs. Chen, both looking equally bewildered. "Can I help you?" Harris managed, his voice cracking slightly. Ironside's expression was calm, almost gentle, but his presence was overwhelming. "We're here for Danny Peterson." Harris blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" "Danny Peterson," Ironside repeated, his voice steady and clear. 8 years old, third grade, the kid who's been getting beaten up in your school for the past 3 months while you did nothing about it. A muscle in Harris's jaw twitched. "I don't know what you've been told, but we take bullying very seriously here. You take it so seriously that a child has documented bruises, his mother has filed multiple reports, and the bullying has only gotten worse." Ironside took a single step forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to escort Danny to school, every single day, if that's what it takes, until you get your act together and protect him like you're supposed to." Behind Ironside, the wall of bikers stood silent and unmoving. There were men in their 60s and women who looked like they could outlift most construction workers. There were veterans, mechanics, nurses, teachers and accountants, people from every walk of life united by the brotherhood of the road and the belief that children deserved protection. Harris opened his mouth, then closed it. He glanced at Deputy Collins, who shrugged slightly as if to say, "They're not breaking any laws." Martinez whispered something in Harris's ear. The principal's shoulders sagged. "I'll need to call the superintendent." "You do that," Ironside said. "We'll wait." Inside the school, word had spread like wildfire. Danny stood at the classroom window, his small hands pressed against the glass, staring at the sea of motorcycles and leather. He didn't understand what was happening. He'd never seen anything like this. Mrs. Patterson had tried to gently guide the students back to their seats, but even she kept glancing outside, clearly moved by the display. A knock came at the classroom door. Mrs. Chen, the counselor, poked her head in. "Danny Peterson, can you come with me, please?" Danny's stomach dropped. Was he in trouble? Had he done something wrong? He grabbed his backpack and followed Mrs. Chen down the hallway, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. They walked past classrooms where students and teachers alike were pressed against windows. They walked past the cafeteria, where the lunch staff had abandoned their prep work to stare outside. They walked all the way to the front entrance. When the doors opened, Danny stepped outside into a wall of sound and presence. The bikers parted slightly, creating a path. Ironside walked forward and knelt down on one knee so he was at Danny's eye level. Up close, the man was even more intimidating. Broad shoulders, weathered face, hands that looked like they could crush stone. but his eyes were kind. "Danny," Ironside said softly. "My name is Jack, but my friends call me Ironside. Your Uncle Marcus is a buddy of mine. He told me you've been having some trouble at school." Danny nodded slowly, unable to speak. "Well, we heard about that, and we decided that's not okay. Nobody gets to hurt you, Danny. Not here, not anywhere, you understand?" Danny's eyes welled up. He'd been holding everything in for so long. The fear, the shame, the feeling that somehow this was all his fault. "They won't stop," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They won't stop bullying me." Ironside reached out and placed one massive hand gently on Danny's shoulder. "They will now. See all these people behind me. Every single one of them is here because they believe you deserve to feel safe. And we're going to make sure that happens." Behind Ironside, a woman named Raven, a nurse who rode a custom Sportster, wiped tears from her eyes. Beside her, a man called Preacher, who'd lost his own son to suicide after years of bullying, clenched his jaw and looked away. Danny looked past Ironside at the incredible sight before him. Hundreds of motorcycles gleaming in the October sun. Hundreds of people, all strangers, all here for him. It was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. "You're not alone anymore, kid," Ironside said. "We've got your back." Principal Harris reappeared, his phone still in his hand. His face had gone from pale to flushed red. "The superintendent wants to meet with you," he said stiffly to Ironside, "this afternoon, to discuss how we can address the situation." "Good," Ironside replied, standing. "We'll be there, and so will Danny's mother, I assume." "Yes," Harris said quickly. "Of course." Ironside turned back to Danny and smiled, a real warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You go on back to class now. We're going to stick around for a bit just to make sure everything's okay. But remember what I said. You're not alone." Danny nodded, still unable to form words. Mrs. Chen gently guided him back toward the building, but he kept looking back over his shoulder at the bikers. Some of them waved, others gave him thumbs up. One woman blew him a kiss. As Danny disappeared back into the school, Ironside turned to his brothers and sisters. "Split up. Some of you park at each entrance. We stay until the final bell today. Nobody comes near this kid. Understood?" A chorus of agreement rumbled through the crowd. They dispersed to their positions, forming a protective perimeter around the entire school. Some leaned against their bikes, arms crossed. Others sat on curbs, chatting quietly. A few pulled out thermoses of coffee and bags of beef jerky, settling in for the long haul. Inside, Trevor Dunham and his two friends sat in their fifth-grade classroom, faces pressed against the window. They'd seen Danny being brought outside. They'd seen the army of bikers. And though they were only 10 and 11 years old, they understood instinctively that something fundamental had changed. The power they'd held over Danny, the ability to hurt him without consequence, had evaporated in the rumble of 500 engines. By lunchtime, news crews had arrived. Channel 6, Channel 10, even a CNN affiliate from Nashville. Reporters tried to get interviews, but the bikers were politely uncooperative. "We're just here to support a kid," Tank said to one persistent journalist. "That's all you need to know." But one reporter, a young woman named Sarah Hendricks from the local newspaper, approached with genuine curiosity rather than sensationalism. Ironside agreed to speak with her briefly. She asked him why he'd organized this display. "Because adults failed that boy," Ironside said simply. "His mother did everything right. She reported, she documented, she advocated. And the system ignored her because the bully's father had connections. That's not how things should work. Children shouldn't have to suffer because adults are too cowardly or too corrupt to do the right thing." So we stepped in. "Do you think this will make a difference?" Sarah asked. Ironside looked at her steadily. "It already has. That kid knows he matters now. He knows people care. And the people running this school know the world is watching. Yeah, I think it'll make a difference." The interview would run on the front page the next day, sparking a national conversation about bullying, school accountability, and the unexpected heroes who sometimes emerge from the most unlikely places. At 2:45 p.m., the final bell rang. Students poured out of Benjamin Franklin Elementary, and for once, Danny walked with his head up. He spotted his mother's Honda in the pickup line and ran toward it. Rebecca had left work early, unable to concentrate after Marcus had told her what was happening. When Danny climbed into the car, he was crying, but this time they were tears of relief. "Mom, did you see them? Did you see all those people?" Rebecca pulled him into a hug, her own tears flowing freely. "I saw, baby. I saw." As they pulled away from the school, Ironside gave a signal. Slowly, the motorcycles roared to life. One by one, they pulled out, forming an impromptu escort for Rebecca's Honda. They rode with her for 6 blocks, a protective convoy surrounding her car, before peeling off in different directions with final waves and salutes. That evening, the Peterson house was filled with unexpected visitors. Marcus arrived with Ironside and 3 other members of the motorcycle club. They brought pizza, soda, and stories that made Danny laugh for the first time in months. Ironside sat on the living room floor with Danny, looking through the boys' collection of superhero action figures, discussing the merits of Spider-Man versus Iron Man with complete seriousness. "You know, Danny," Ironside said as they arranged tiny plastic figures into battle formations, "heroes aren't always the people you expect. They don't always wear capes or have special powers. Sometimes they're just people who show up when someone needs help." Danny nodded, studying Ironside's weathered face. "Are you a hero?" Ironside chuckled. "Nah, kid. I'm just a guy who rides a motorcycle, but I believe in standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That's not being a hero. That's just being a decent human being." Before they left that night, Ironside handed Rebecca a card with his phone number. "Anything else happens, you call me. Day or night. We meant what we said. We've got his back." Rebecca clutched the card like it was made of gold. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank us," Ironside said. "Just keep being the kind of mother who fights for her kid. That's all the thanks we need." The following afternoon, the meeting at Benjamin Franklin Elementary was packed. The superintendent, Dr. Patricia Wallace, had flown in from Nashville. The school board was there, including Trevor Dunham's father, Gerald, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Rebecca arrived with Marcus and 2 members of the Hells Angels, including Ironside, whose presence alone seemed to shrink the room. Dr. Wallace was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who'd spent 30 years in education. She'd reviewed Danny's file, the incident reports, and the documentation Rebecca had provided. Her expression throughout the meeting was one of barely contained fury, not at the bikers, but at her own staff. "Let me be absolutely clear," Dr. Wallace began, her voice cold and precise. "What happened to Danny Peterson represents a catastrophic failure at multiple levels of our district. Mrs. Peterson filed appropriate complaints. She provided evidence, and those complaints were either ignored or minimized." Principal Harris shifted in his seat. Gerald Dunham's face had gone red. "Effective immediately," Dr. Wallace continued. "Benjamin Franklin Elementary will implement a zero-tolerance bullying policy with teeth. That means immediate suspension for physical violence, mandatory counseling for repeat offenders, and a dedicated ombudsman who reports directly to me, not to school principals, who may have conflicts of interest." She turned to look directly at Gerald Dunham. "And if I find that any school board member has used their position to shield their child from consequences, I will pursue their removal and potential criminal charges for obstruction." Dunham opened his mouth to protest, then thought better of it. Dr. Wallace turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Peterson, I cannot undo the harm that's been done to your son, but I can promise you that it stops now, and that we will do everything in our power to make sure he feels safe in our schools." Rebecca nodded, too emotional to speak. Ironside leaned forward slightly. "And if it doesn't stop? What then?" Dr. Wallace met his gaze without flinching. "Then I hope you'll let me know, because clearly you're better at protecting children than some of the people I've been paying to do exactly that." A ghost of a smile crossed Ironside's face. He respected people who didn't back down. The meeting concluded with concrete action items. Trevor Dunham and his friends would face 2-week suspensions, mandatory counseling, and would be separated from Danny's class permanently. A school-wide assembly on bullying would be held. Teachers would receive updated training, and most importantly, a direct hotline would be established for parents to report concerns without going through potentially compromised channels. As they filed out of the conference room, Gerald Dunham approached Rebecca. He looked defeated, older somehow. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I was protecting my son when I should have been teaching him to be better. That was wrong." Rebecca studied him for a long moment. "Teach him now," she said, "before it's too late." Word of the Hells Angels' intervention spread far beyond Knoxville. The story was picked up by major news outlets, talk shows, and social media. Suddenly, similar situations were being reported across the country. Kids suffering in silence, parents fighting bureaucracies, schools failing to act. And in many cases, local motorcycle clubs were stepping up, inspired by what had happened in Tennessee. In Sacramento, California, a chapter of the Mongols escorted a transgender teenager to school after weeks of harassment. In Boston, members of the Outlaws stood watch outside an elementary school where a disabled girl had been repeatedly assaulted. The movement grew organically, a nationwide network of unlikely protectors united by simple principle. Children deserved safety, and if the system wouldn't provide it, they would. For Danny, life didn't magically become perfect overnight. He still had bad days. He still sometimes woke up with nightmares, but he also had something he'd never had before, a community. The local Hells Angels chapter adopted him as a sort of unofficial mascot. They invited him and Rebecca to the garage, where Danny learned about motorcycle maintenance from Marcus and heard stories about the open road. They took him to the club's annual charity toy drive, where he helped distribute presents to other kids in need. On his 9th birthday, the club threw him a party at Smoky Mountain Custom Cycles. 50 bikers showed up, along with classmates from school who now treated Danny with a mixture of respect and awe. Ironside presented Danny with a custom leather vest, child-sized, with Little Brother embroidered on the back. Danny wore it proudly, beaming so widely his face hurt. "Remember," Ironside told him as they sat on the hood of a truck, eating cake and watching the sunset paint the Smoky Mountains gold and purple. "What happened to you wasn't your fault. And what we did wasn't about revenge. It was about showing you that you matter, that you're worth protecting, and that there are people in this world who will stand up for what's right even when it's not easy or convenient." Danny nodded, licking frosting from his fingers. "When I grow up, I want to be like you." Ironside smiled. "When you grow up, I want you to be like you, but even better. Someone who remembers what it felt like to need help and who's always ready to give it." As the months passed, Benjamin Franklin Elementary underwent a transformation. The new anti-bullying measures were working. Student surveys showed increased feelings of safety. Parent involvement went up, and perhaps most importantly, kids started looking out for each other. Danny, once a target, became a champion for other vulnerable students. He befriended the new kid who didn't speak English well. He stood up for a girl being teased about her weight. He'd learned from the best that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear. Rebecca found herself changed as well. She'd spent so long feeling powerless, fighting a system that seemed designed to wear her down. But the intervention had shown her something crucial. You're never truly powerless when you have community. She started volunteering with a local parents' advocacy group, helping other mothers and fathers navigate school bureaucracies and fight for their children. Trevor Dunham's story took a different turn. The suspension and counselling had been a wake-up call. His father, humbled by the public scrutiny, had finally started paying attention. Trevor began therapy, where he unpacked the anger and insecurity that had driven his cruelty. He wouldn't become Danny's friend. Some wounds heal but leave scars. But he did, eventually, approach Danny in the hallway one day and say, "I'm sorry for what I did to you. It was wrong." Danny had simply nodded. Forgiveness was complicated, and he wasn't sure he was ready, but the apology mattered. The story of Danny Peterson and the Hells Angels became something of a legend in Knoxville. People would reference it when discussing the power of community action, the failure of institutions, and the surprising sources from which heroism can emerge. The local newspaper ran a follow-up piece 6 months later, checking in on Danny's progress and the lasting changes at his school. Sarah Hendricks, the reporter who'd first interviewed Ironside, won an award for her coverage. But perhaps the most significant impact was one that couldn't be measured in policy changes or news stories. It was in the shift that occurred in how people saw both bikers and bullying. The stereotype of motorcycle clubs as nothing but criminals and troublemakers took a hit. People started recognizing the humanity, the honor codes, and the fierce loyalty that characterized many of these groups. And the conversation about bullying evolved beyond simple "kids will be kids" dismissals to serious discussions about institutional responsibility and the long-term trauma that unchecked cruelty inflicts. 1 year after the intervention, on a crisp October morning, very similar to the one that had started everything, Ironside stood in his garage working on his Road King. His phone rang. It was Rebecca. "Jack, it's Danny's birthday this weekend, and we're having a party at the park. He specifically asked if you and some of the guys could come. He wants to show off his new bike." Ironside smiled. Rebecca had bought Danny a bicycle, a modest BMX that Danny treated like it was a Harley Davidson. "We'll be there," he said. "Tell the kid we're bringing the whole crew." That Saturday, 20 motorcycles rolled into Chilhowee Park, engines rumbling with restrained power. Families having picnics looked up in surprise. Danny, who'd been anxiously watching the parking lot, let out a whoop and ran toward them. He'd grown 2 inches in the past year, lost his baby fat, and carried himself with new confidence. But his face still lit up with the same joy when he saw his friends. The party was simple: hot dogs, a sheet cake decorated to look like a motorcycle, and various kids from school playing on the playground equipment. But the presence of the bikers transformed it into something special. They showed Danny's friends their motorcycles, let them sit on the seats, and shared stories about the road. They treated every child with respect and attention, proving once again that the roughest exteriors can hide the gentlest hearts. As afternoon turned to evening and families began to pack up, Danny approached Ironside one more time. "Thank you," he said seriously, extending his hand for a shake like he'd seen adults do. Ironside shook it firmly, then pulled the kid into a hug. "You don't need to thank us, Danny. We were just doing what anyone should do, but I'm proud of who you're becoming. Keep standing up for people. Keep being brave. The world needs more of that." Danny nodded against Ironside's chest, then pulled back and grinned. "Race you to the parking lot? On foot or on wheels?" "Foot! You're on, kid." They took off running, Danny's laughter echoing across the park as Ironside pretended to struggle to keep up. Rebecca watched them go, Marcus at her side, both of them marveling at the simple beauty of a child being allowed to be a child again. The motorcycles eventually roared to life, a chorus of mechanical thunder that had become, for Danny, the sound of safety. They rolled out of the park in formation, and as the last bike disappeared around the corner, Rebecca whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force in the universe had sent these unlikely angels into their lives. Because sometimes salvation comes from unexpected places. Sometimes heroes wear leather instead of capes, and sometimes all it takes to change a child's life is for enough people to say, "This matters, you matter, and we're not going to stand by and let anyone hurt you." The story of Danny Peterson and the 500 motorcycles that rolled up to his school became more than just a story. It became a reminder that communities are built by choice, that family can be found in the most unexpected places, and that courage often means simply showing up when someone needs you most. And on quiet Tennessee nights, when Danny lay in bed looking at the leather vest hanging in his closet, the one that said, "Little Brother," he understood that he was part of something bigger now. A brotherhood bound not by blood, but by shared values, loyalty, protection, and the unshakable belief that no child should ever have to fight their battles alone. The bullying stopped, the wounds healed, and Danny Peterson learned the most important lesson of all, that even in the darkest moments, when it feels like the whole world has turned against you, there are people out there who will stand up, step in and say, "Not on our watch." The years rolled on like the wheels of those Harleys that had changed everything. And Danny Peterson grew up understanding something most kids his age never fully grasped. That real strength wasn't about how hard you could hit, but about how many times you'd stand up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves. By the time Danny turned 12, he'd become something of a fixture at Smoky Mountain Custom Cycles. Every Saturday morning, Rebecca would drop him off at the garage, where Marcus would put him to work learning the fundamentals of motorcycle maintenance. Danny started with the basics, cleaning parts, organizing tools, fetching supplies. But gradually, Marcus taught him more complex skills: how to change oil, adjust chains, diagnose electrical problems, and even some basic welding. The bikers who came through the shop treated Danny like one of their own. They'd ruffle his hair, share their road stories, and occasionally test his knowledge with trick questions about engine specifications. Danny soaked it all in, his notebook filling with sketches of motorcycle parts and scribbled notes about torque specifications and maintenance schedules. Ironside still stopped by regularly, though his visits had become less frequent as his responsibilities with the club expanded. The Hells Angels had been getting more involved in community outreach across Tennessee, organizing toy drives for underprivileged children, escorting veterans' funeral processions, and yes, continuing to intervene when kids were being bullied and schools weren't responding. The model they'd pioneered with Danny had spread to chapters across the country, creating an informal network of protection for vulnerable children. One Saturday in March, when Danny was 13, Ironside arrived at the garage with unusual purpose in his stride. He found Danny in the back, carefully reassembling a carburetor under Marcus's watchful eye. "Danny, got a minute?" Ironside asked. Danny looked up, wiping grease from his hands onto an already stained rag. "Sure. What's up?" Ironside led him outside, where they sat on the hood of Marcus's truck, watching clouds drift across the Smoky Mountains. "I've got a situation I wanted to talk to you about. There's a girl up in Maryville, about 15 years old, name's Sophie Chen. She's being harassed pretty badly at school. Combination of racist bullying and just general cruelty. Her parents are immigrants from China, don't speak much English, and don't really understand how to navigate the American school system." Danny listened intently, his expression growing serious. "Her older brother reached out to us through a friend of a friend," Ironside continued. "Asked if we could do what we did for you, and I was thinking, you've been through this, you know what it feels like. Would you want to come with us when we go talk to her? Maybe share your experience. Let her know she's not alone." Danny felt his heart rate pick up. The thought of reliving those dark days, of putting words to feelings he'd worked hard to move past, was intimidating. But he remembered how isolated he'd felt, how desperately he'd needed to know that someone understood. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'll come." The following Wednesday, a scaled-down version of the original intervention took place at Maryville High School. Only about 50 motorcycles this time, enough to make a statement without overwhelming the smaller school. Danny rode in Ironside's truck, his stomach churning with a mixture of nervousness and purpose. Sophie Chen was a tiny girl with long black hair and eyes that held too much sadness for someone her age. When she was brought out to meet the assembled bikers, she looked terrified, as if she expected them to be another threat rather than allies. Ironside introduced himself, then gestured to Danny. "Sophie, this is Danny Peterson. A few years ago, he was in a situation pretty similar to yours. I thought maybe you two could talk for a bit." Sophie looked at Danny, this lanky 13-year-old with shaggy brown hair and kind eyes, and some of the fear in her expression softened. They walked a short distance away from the adults, finding a bench under a sprawling oak tree. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Danny said, "It's the worst feeling in the world, isn't it? When you wake up in the morning and the first thing you feel is dread because you have to go to school." Sophie's eyes welled up. She nodded. "I used to fake being sick," Danny continued. "Stuck thermometers under hot water, pretended to throw up, anything to avoid going. My mom knew what I was doing, but she didn't know how to help me. And the worst part was feeling like it was somehow my fault, like if I was just different, cooler, stronger, whatever, it wouldn't be happening." "They make fun of my lunch," Sophie whispered. "Call it dog food and weird Chinese crap." They pull their eyes back and make ching-chong noises. One girl took pictures of me in the locker room and posted them online with mean comments. Danny felt anger surge through him, the same protective fury he'd seen in Ironside's eyes that October morning years ago. "That's not okay. None of that is okay, and it's not your fault." "Then why won't anyone help me? I told my counselor. I told the vice principal. They just keep saying to ignore it, that the other kids will get bored and stop." Sophie's voice cracked. "But they don't stop. They never stop." "I know," Danny said. "That's why these guys are here, to make sure the school takes it seriously this time. But Sophie, I need you to know something. It gets better. I know that sounds like a cliché, but it's true. You won't feel like this forever." Sophie looked up at him, searching his face for truth. "You really got through it?" "I really did. And you know what helped the most? Understanding that I didn't have to get through it alone. These people," he gestured back toward the wall of bikers, "they showed me that there are good people in the world who will stand up for you, even if they don't know you. That changed everything." They talked for another 20 minutes, Danny sharing his story in more detail. The bad days, the gradual healing, the way his perspective had shifted. Sophie listened with desperate attention, as if his words were oxygen and she'd been drowning. When they rejoined the group, Sophie's brother James, a college freshman home for spring break, approached Danny and shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just thank you." The intervention at Maryville High followed a similar pattern to Danny's. The school administration, confronted by the physical presence of dozens of bikers and the threat of media attention, suddenly became very cooperative. Policy changes were promised. The students responsible for the harassment faced consequences, and Sophie, like Danny before her, learned that she mattered. But for Danny, something shifted that day. He'd spent years being helped, being protected, being the one who needed rescue. Now, for the first time, he'd been able to help someone else. The feeling was intoxicating. Not in an egotistical way, but in the deep satisfaction of knowing he'd made a real difference in someone's darkest moment. On the drive back to Knoxville, Danny was quiet, processing. Ironside glanced over at him. "You okay, kid?" "Yeah," Danny said. "I was just thinking, is this what you guys do? Like, is this what the club is really about?" Ironside considered the question carefully. The club is about a lot of things. Brotherhood, freedom, the open road. But yeah, part of it is looking out for people. We've all been through hard times. Most of us had rough childhoods, made mistakes, fought our own demons. When you've been down, really down, you develop a radar for other people who are hurting. And you have a choice. You can ignore it, or you can do something about it. I want to do something about it, Danny said with sudden conviction. Not just once. I want to keep helping. Ironside smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. Over the following year, Danny became a regular presence at these interventions. The Hells Angels had refined their approach. They'd developed relationships with sympathetic journalists, created documentation protocols, and even consulted with child psychologists to ensure they were truly helping rather than simply intimidating schools into compliance. Danny's role was unique. As someone who'd been through it and come out the other side, he could connect with bullied kids in ways the adult bikers couldn't. He met Carlos in Memphis, a gay teenager whose parents had kicked him out and who was sleeping in his car while finishing high school. He met Emma in Nashville, a girl with cerebral palsy who'd been physically assaulted by classmates. He met twins in Chattanooga who were being starved by their foster parents while the system looked the other way. Each story broke his heart and simultaneously strengthened his resolve. Rebecca watched her son's transformation with pride and no small amount of concern. He was only 13, now 14, being exposed to trauma and suffering that most kids his age never encountered. She worried it would harden him, damage him, but when she expressed these fears to Ironside, he offered a different perspective. He's not being exposed to darkness, Rebecca. He's being shown that even in darkness there's light. Every kid he helps, every intervention that works, that's reinforcing a positive message, that good people exist, that systems can change, that standing up matters. That's not going to damage him. That's going to make him one of the strongest people you'll ever know. Marcus agreed. Besides, Beck, look at him. He's not withdrawn or depressed. He's engaged, purposeful. He's found his calling at 14. Most people spend their whole lives searching for that. Rebecca couldn't argue with the results. Danny was thriving in school now, his grades excellent. He'd made genuine friends, not the fair-weather kind who'd avoided him during his bullying ordeal, but real friends who shared his values. He'd joined the school's peer mediation program and had become the kid other students sought out when they had problems. On Danny's 15th birthday, the Hells Angels threw another party at Smoky Mountain Custom Cycles, but this time there was an additional element. Ironside presented Danny with a custom-painted helmet, not for a motorcycle yet, but symbolic. "For when you're old enough," Ironside said, "you've earned the right to ride with us." But the real surprise came next. Tank, the mountain-sized biker who'd ridden second in that original formation years ago, stepped forward with a wooden plaque. On it was mounted a leather patch, a custom design showing angel wings surrounding a shield, with the words Guardian Angel embroidered above and Danny Peterson, honorary member, below. "This doesn't make you a full member," Tank explained, his gruff voice surprisingly gentle. "You're too young for that, and you've got to earn your way in when the time comes. But this recognizes what you've become, someone who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. You're one of us in the ways that matter most." Danny accepted the plaque with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. Rebecca stood beside Marcus, both of them crying as well. The assembled bikers, 50 or 60 strong, erupted in applause and cheers. That night, as the party wound down and people began heading home, Sophie Chen arrived with her family. She'd heard about the birthday celebration and had driven down from Maryville with her parents and brother James. Sophie was doing better now, still cautious, still healing, but noticeably more confident than she'd been a year earlier. She approached Danny shyly, holding a wrapped package. "I made this for you," she said. Inside was a pencil drawing of stunning detail and skill. It showed the view from outside Benjamin Franklin Elementary, with hundreds of motorcycles lined up and a small figure, Danny, standing in front of them. The perspective and shading were professional quality. "Sophie, this is incredible," Danny breathed. "You did this?" She nodded. "I'm thinking about going to art school. My counselor says I'm good enough to maybe get a scholarship. Before everything, I'd pretty much given up on that dream. But you showed me that things can get better, that people care. So I started trying again." They hugged. These two kids bonded by shared trauma and shared healing, and Danny understood in that moment the full weight of what Ironside had been trying to teach him, that helping others wasn't just about them, it was about creating ripples that spread far beyond what you could see. The years continued their steady march. Danny turned 16 and got his driver's license. Marcus helped him buy a beat-up Honda Civic, not a motorcycle yet, but it was freedom nonetheless. He worked part-time at the garage, saving money for college and, yes, eventually a bike of his own. The interventions continued, though less frequently now. The word had spread enough that many schools had reformed their policies proactively, not wanting to face the public relations nightmare of biker clubs rolling up to their campuses. The Hells Angels had accidentally sparked a nationwide conversation about institutional accountability and children's rights that was bearing real fruit. But there were still kids who slipped through the cracks, and when they did, the network was there. Danny, now nearly 6 feet tall and far from the scared 8-year-old he'd once been, continued to serve as a bridge between the adult bikers and the frightened children. He'd developed an intuitive understanding of trauma, learned when to push and when to simply listen.